G'day everyone and welcome to the GameDay Squad Aussie Rules Fantasy Show. I'm Pitty, that's Haz, and together we are the Fantasy Bros. We've partnered with GameDay Squad to bring you everything you need to know this season to succeed in GDS Aussie Rules. Haz, how are you, mate? It's great to have you here 2 weeks in a row.
I'm good, mate. 2 weeks in a row. The weather kind of hit today, and footy was just like, nah, the ground's too wet. We're going to move to the indoor sports hall. And I was like, all right, it's my opportunity to jump back on the show once again and join you for round 10. After, no doubt, we'll talk about it shortly, but what was a pretty ordinary week for GDS for me. So, what about yourself, mate? How you going?
Yeah, good, mate. Good. And as I said, when you got that news, it was bad news for you, but it was great news for me, knowing that you were going to come on. So shout out to our good mate there, Bales, as well. He was really accommodating in being able to come on next week. He's always keen to jump on the show, a good friend there, Bales. So yeah, great to have you on there, mate, and great to unpack a crazy round 9 that was and preview a really big round 10 at the same time. So before we recap that round 9, as our viewers and listeners, just make sure you've used that code there on screen so you can get yourself 3 9-player common packs. Get involved with Game Day Squad, as we've talked about too. It is never too late. Now, let's talk about it. As we said, it was a big round 9. There were some really, really high highs and there were some shockingly bad lows. Talk us through how you went, mate, across around the grounds.
Oh, yeah. I think I've said it a couple of times this season when I've been on it. It was probably my worst performance in GDS, and I keep managing to do one better every single week. It just seemed to pick the wrong players, seemed to fade the wrong people. So, yeah, my best finish was 27th and under 22s, and that's quite disappointing for myself. Best standard finish was, I think, 36th in Contender, which was my pod side. So, yeah, not a great week, and I'm looking to looking to move past it and move on pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a fair shout. And hey, just quickly, I saw there too. We've got Arnie Booger in the chat as well as a few others there, and they say trust the bros. Thanks, guys. Swapped 4 last week for gains. So I'm assuming we helped you out there, Arnie Booger, but we didn't help ourselves.
No, I'm glad we're giving advice to the people out there, but we must be picking those wrong people out of those ones that we choose, and everyone's picking the right ones. So obviously, we give you 3 options and 2 pods, and I think we pick the wrong options every single time.
Yeah. Now, I actually forgot to put my best finish on the screen. That's how much I really thought about last week. Sorry, I've got it there on the slide, but in our run sheet, mate, in our notes, I didn't bother writing anything. That's just how annoyed I was with the week. I slid in Classic. It was just an average week. But that was my best finish in the Sunday Showdown competition. I finished 6th there, which was awesome. I shared that squad as well on our socials. If you want to go back and check out the squad that I played, you can check that out on our Fantasy Bros socials on Instagram and TikTok, for example. But yeah, classic, mate. I had some absolute shocking picks, and I don't know why I did it. I think I just got caught up in the fact I was the coach to beat, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to jump into my scar here. I'm going to play it safe in the forward line. I'm just going to play Connor McDonald. He's been getting, hundreds every single week. I don't love the matchup. Like, he should be okay, but I don't love it. There were others I liked more, like a Toby Green, for example. Any of the others that we spoke about too, Isaac Rankin. And I went with a Connor McDonald, and that cost me. So I didn't even write his score there, but it was in the 40s or 50s thereabouts, and absolutely burned me. But on a more positive note, as you can see, mate, there, our star for the week, my star was Nazaya Wanganeen-Millera. I am really glad that he was a laid out because it meant that I went, sweet, let's throw a Johnny Noble in. And he was my star for the week. What a massive score just to help me. And I played his silver, so I had a little bit of salary on him too. He probably saved my ranking by having him in there. Had a couple others that went big too, but yeah, it was just really Connor McDonald was a big one, and Cal Wilkie, who got injured too. I also had him. So, yeah, playing Cal Wilkie meant that I had to cop Connor McDonald's score.
Mate, I know on screen I've got my scar there as Brodie Grundy, but I'm going to go to my additional scar first, and it's not on screen, but Nasiah Wanganeen-Millera is my additional scar for the week. I'm going to go the flip side of you because I actually went to Wilkie, and I know a lot of people out there in the Discord also went to Wilkie as that late replacement for his 26 GDS points. Now, obviously, the reason he isn't my scar is because I feel bad giving a scar to someone who actually legitimately got hurt and sat out majority of the game. But obviously, instead of Noble in my classic side, that really hurt my week. There was a difference of about 133 points between the two, I believe. So obviously, Wilkie dropped out for me, which meant Brodie Grundy, who is my scar, was actually counting. Where even though he dominated the matchup with Tristan Sherry, he had the 27 hitouts to only the 13 to Sherry. But Brodie Grundy, he only scored 61, and that's because he's handball happy on the weekend. He 11 handballs and only 3 kicks, and he had no marks and I think only 1 tackle. So just cost himself a decent score there. So yeah, quite disappointing from Grundy when obviously Luke Jackson went ballistic and even Sherry outscored him as well. So yeah, he counted for me in classic, which hurt.
Yeah, Will as well, our boy, Will Ashcroft, he wasn't very good. Cozzy Pickett in the forward line, he wasn't very good. And you spoke about the point swing there as well, mate. Quick maths for you. Connor McDonald, 46. Isaac Rankin, 190. That's a difference of 144 GDS points in one decision. Yep. And I played him in other competitions. So
yeah, well, obviously,
yeah, I think
that obviously
everyone
leads into my star, which was Isaac Rankin. But unfortunately, I think like yourself, I only played him in the one comp, which was classic. So I was really left hurting in the other comps, and I only played a bronze. So obviously there was no salary on him or anything like that, but it still didn't save my week. So it wasn't enough, unfortunately. Just some terrible decisions all over the shop. I was really, really close to putting myself as the scar. And I thought that's a little bit harsh on myself because obviously we do give out some decent picks every now and again, but I was not impressed with some of the decisions, and definitely the decision to fade Bont in all sides came back to really bite me in the butt on the weekend, that's for sure.
Yeah, he was incredible, wasn't he? And even, we picked out there too, Jordan Dawson as well. How good was he? I think Daniel Schloss had that there in the chat there too. Yeah, he's been unreal. Obviously, has been struggling recently with a few things going on in his life that are never good. But that last game there, he's had 190 against the 160. Apologies, against the Tigers at the MCG. He's an absolute star and someone we should be looking at pretty much every single week. We might have a conversation about him later too when we get there, mate. But speaking of, I reckon we jump in and start previewing a few of these matchups for a big round 10. So as you can see there on screen, do you want to quickly talk us through what these fixtures look like?
Yeah, of course. So obviously round 10 fixtures, our primetime fixtures are brought to you by the Stats Lab. We have the Lions and the Cats in the grand final rematch at the Gabba tomorrow night to kick off the round. We then have a pretty big showdown in Sydney and Pies at the SCG on Friday night, followed by obviously that double header there. In Darwin, it's Gold Coast versus Port Adelaide. And then on Saturday, we head over to Adelaide where we have the Crows versus North Melbourne. We got the Demons versus the Hawks, which shapes as a very interesting game considering how well the Ds are tracking this season, and that's at the MCG. We've got Carlton and the Bulldogs to round out Saturday's fixtures at Marvel on Saturday night. And then for our Sunday showdown, it's great to see that we've got 6 teams playing this week. I really struggled picking from only the 4 last week. So we've got the Bombers versus the Dockers to kick us off at the MCG. We've got Saints versus the Tigers at Marvel. And then we've got over in the West Coast versus GWS to finish off the round.
Yeah, some really interesting games there to be looking at as well. Some really fantasy relevant ones. There are a few I was sort of looking at, mate, that we will talk about tonight, this week. Obviously, the Suns against Port as well. That's going to be a very fantasy relevant game. There's lots of players in that one we could be looking at, as well as the fact the Suns are a pretty positive matchup. And, we saw a lot of their players in general score quite well at TIO last week. So I'm keen to look at that matchup this week. Obviously, the Blues and the Dogs under the lid. I think that's going to be a really interesting game as well. We know the Dogs are leaking lots of points to defenders, and Carlton are a pretty good matchup through the midfield. Also, we've got the fact that, they made that announcement this week. Michael Voss has, finished up his tenure there at the club. So they're going to have an interim coach this weekend, which is going to make things interesting as well. So that'll be a really interesting game to keep an eye on. And the Saints and the Tigers, that's probably the one I'm most keen for from a fantasy perspective. I think there'll be points everywhere in that game. And keen to let a few of those matchups make our decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Can't wait for the round, and hopefully the Lions kick us off with a win tomorrow night at the Gabba.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Hopefully we can get that win there against the Cats. So let's jump in, mate. Round 10, looking at our defenders. Let's get some of these decisions underway so we can help everyone and hopefully help ourselves in the process as we finalise our squads. But looking at those defenders, mate, we've got our plug and plays there on screen. So we have Jack Sinclair, Lockie Ash, Lockie Whitfield, Dane Zorko, Archie Roberts. And just this week, we found out that Naziah Wanganeen Miller is going to be ruled out for about 3 weeks. Trust that, however you will, whether it's 3 weeks in the end or not, we'll find out. But he has been officially ruled out definitely for this weekend after missing last weekend with that calf injury too. That came out late. So, yeah, keep an eye on Naz. We can't be playing him in our squads this week. And in terms of those, I just flagged Lockie Ash, mate. I just put a little asterisk next to him just because I thought that midfield role, that continued last weekend and his scoring just wasn't at the lofty standards that he normally sets, even with that juiced up matchup against the Bombers at home. Now, I'm not saying fade him because they're coming up against the Eagles this weekend. I think we're still playing him. But I just put the asterisk there in terms of think about what salary you're going to put on him because I don't think he scores as well in that midfield role as he does in the halfback role that we see. And I would love to see that flip around. But I just thought put an asterisk on to keep an eye on it. What are your thoughts there with Lockie Ash?
Yeah, it's interesting because his CBAs did drop by about half from obviously the week before against Gold Coast. So he had about 61% there against the Suns, and then he had about 30% last week against the Dons. So it's not like it was mainly a midfield role. It was mainly a half-back role where we know he can score well. Obviously, maybe the game just didn't really plan out for him. But definitely, like you said, he's coming up against the Eagles this week. So I definitely don't think we're questioning his place in our sides. It's, like you said, whether or not you did choose to load up salary or whether he's going to bounce back to that high pedigree that we know that he's got.
Yeah, and you mentioned his CBAs there. Something to keep an eye on. We'll mention this later when we get to the forward line. Toby Green, his CBAs actually went back to what they have been. So he had that massive drop when Lockie Ash went through the midfield. Last week, Toby Green went back nearly, again, 50% CBAs. So we'll talk about that a bit later on. Maybe that's why Lockie Ash had a bit of a drop last week as well. But yeah, just something to keep an eye on. I'm still going to roll him out. I think we should still roll him out, but just keeping an eye on that role as well and how that sort of works out for him. What do you think about that comment there on screen about Porco, our boy Dane Zorko getting tagged? I'll tell you what, though, he didn't get tagged last week and he was poor. Yeah. He could also be another scar for my squad. But what do you reckon? Will they go to him?
I think it's something that we're going to definitely cover later. So right now I'm going to say no. I have an idea on who will get tagged by, obviously, Mullen. I don't think Zorko is probably damaging as some of the other midfielders that the Lions have in terms of winning a game off their own boot. Obviously, Zorko does rack up quite a bit, but he isn't the only rebounding defender in that back line. And like you said, he did have quite a bit of a down game last week and obviously he's coming back off the injury. So I don't think the Cats would probably send someone to him, and it definitely won't be Mullen. Maybe someone might do a bit of a run with and maybe stop off those short 45s that he likes to get, but I definitely don't see it being a hard tag.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, mate, and we'll talk about who might cop that attention later on. Good comment there on screen from Nate Daddies as well. Noble, what a pig John Noble is, and you could throw Archie Roberts into that conversation. Archie Roberts is more than a pig, I reckon, just the way he's playing footy, but Johnny Noble, what a couple games from him recently, hey, like just looking back at what he's done in those last 2 weeks. I'm so glad I ended up putting him in our squad last week, just because he had that massive 159. He had the 178 the week before that. I think he's definitely an option again this week. So you can see on screen we've got Jaden Short, Jordan Clark, Dan Houston as 3 options. I think with Jordan Clark, you can also probably pair a Luke Ryan. We'll have a discussion about those 2 boys, but I think a Freo Docker will be probably a pretty good shout this week in our back line. But I do like a John Noble as well, just based, and we picked this out before the pod, right? I don't have him on screen because Port don't stand out as a really great matchup to target, and he's historically been not very poor, but hasn't been very good against them in the past in terms of hitting those really good scores we like in GameDay Squad. However, you can pick him this week and he's a good option because of his recent form and the fact they're playing at TIO again, and it's a great venue for him to score at, and it's a great venue for the Suns to score at too. So I think he's definitely a great shout, and someone who I have in maybe it's Contender. I'd have to double check. I think I made that change earlier. He's in one of my squads, and I'm trying to split that last defender at the moment. You're keen on a Johnny Noble again, mate?
Yeah, look, it's so hard not to go to John Noble at the moment. I think Gold Coast has kind of changed their ball movement to really go through him quite a bit, and they're using not only him but all their halfbacks really. Like you said, Yulin, Rioli, kind of all racked up last weekend, and TIO just has so many points available for these running halfbacks. So Noble's pushing forward. He's kicked a goal in the last 3 games. So yeah, really hard to ignore that form, and he loves playing at
Yeah.
TIO. So if someone's racking up 10
Speak,
marks a game and getting 20 kicks, how can you not pick them?
yeah, I guess the only thing there too, Nate, that is as well, is if you actually look at, the those halfbacks and those designated kickers who have scored against Port recently. Bailey Dale last week, 107. Now, also not on that screen too that I'm looking at is a Connor Buderick in the forward line who does play behind the footy. He had 130 GDS points, so we've got to keep that in mind too. That's not appearing here. Um, Wayne Miller, 128. Josh Worrell, 100. Tom Stewart, 116. Impey, 129. Like, they're really good scores. So I think you can definitely go a John Noble, but he's just not on screen because I think there's a couple others we need to talk about as well this week. And speaking of Jaden Short, I'm really keen on a Jaden Short this week. He's the one I've plugged into my spot. I had him as my last defender with Naz being out. He's now just a lock across all comps for me. They've got the St Kilda matchup this week, the Tigers. That's the fourth best matchup for opposition defenders. We saw what John Noble did last week. We just spoke about it, 159. And then, like you picked out, mate, Hewland, Rioli, and Mac Andrew, 128, 126, 120. There's points to be had. They're a great matchup. We've known that for a long time. And he's actually averaging 114 GDS points against them in his last 4. So that's scores of 105, 128, 108, and 116. So he scores quite well against them. And the other thing to keep in mind, we talk about form and we talk about role. He is the designated kicker for the Tigers. He's the one getting that footy, and he hasn't dropped below 100 this season. So this matchup could be that nice little ceiling score like we saw in those first 2 rounds this year. So I'm very hot on a Jaden Short and just locking him in everywhere, I think.
Yeah, I think it's hard to ignore the matchup, and I think it's hard to ignore the form. And obviously, you talk about safe consistency scores. Obviously, hasn't gone below 100 like you mentioned. So we're locking in 100 before the upside comes in. He's got a high score of 159 alongside another game of 140. So yeah, the upside's there. The roles there. Obviously, only real flag is the Tigers are so injury depleted, and obviously that potentially just might mean that they really do struggle to get their hands on the footy. But obviously he's going to be the first one to get it as long as they kick it behind or get an intercept mark. They're going to be looking for Short as that designated ball user. I actually saw something today that if Caleb Smith doesn't get through or doesn't get up to be named to play, they won't be able to field 26 players or healthy players when team lists drop for Sunday. That's the injury crisis at the Tigers at the moment. So yeah, obviously if Short's fit, healthy, he's going to be one of their best players out in that field. So it's going to be hard to ignore him.
Yeah. Yeah, lock him in. Lock him in. I almost think when they don't have players, that they sort of trust the ball in the hand of, it almost, bumps his stocks up, I reckon. It'd be different if he was a midfielder and he's kind of relying on those defenders to get him the footy. But he's the one moving that footy out. So, yeah, I think he's just a lock. And speaking about that matchup there too, mate, or targeting matchups, I should say, we can't not talk about a Freo defender this week because they've got that Essendon matchup. They are the number one easiest matchup for opposition defenders in the last 3 games, and they're the second best matchup for defenders across the whole season. So we have to talk about them. And I've put Jordan Clark on screen because I still see him as the safer of the 2 to go for. But maybe we do need to rethink that because he hasn't been in great form recently. 2 sub-100 scores in a row. I just wonder that, could it be a Luke Ryan you're looking at instead? Just to keep this in perspective, Lockie Whitfield had 151 on them last week with Wilmot, Zorko, Coleman, and Leicester the week before, going 160, 145, 125, and 120. There is a case to say you could probably pick both or pick either, and it should be good. He also hit 160 on them last year in round 15, and he had 106 the year before. So I think coming off some subpar performances, this could be a game where we see a Jordan Clark bounce back. But I think Luke Ryan's the pod play here. I think if you look at look into Stats Lab at the percentages of players played, you'd see Jordan Clark as the more popular and Luke Ryan would be the pod. quickly touching on Luke Ryan, mate, he has had better form. So he's had 89, 122, and 114 in his last three, whereas Jordan Clark has been a lot worse than that in terms of his recent scoring. And his last couple against the Bombers, Luke Ryan's had 154 and 143. So I think there, maybe which way do you want to go? If you want to chase the ceiling, I'd go a Luke Ryan. If you maybe want to go a bit safer, go a Jordan Clark, but both should probably be good this weekend.
Yeah, it's interesting you say the safer pick is Jordan Clark when you talk about those three his scores in his last three games. Luke Ryan's probably the safer play at the moment. I think he gets that recently. That's all right. Like if we're talking just on the last 3 weeks alone, he's getting that cheap, chippy that we talk about. You get those kicks, getting those marks. Where Jordan Clark, obviously, he's all Australian halfback. He's a great player. It's just not really translating to GDS scores at the moment. Like he's got a high score of 143 this year against the Eagles, but he hasn't gone over 115 outside of that. So yeah, there's potentially a ceiling, but if anything, if I was to target the matchup, I'd go ceiling and consistency is probably leaning towards Luke Ryan currently anyway.
Yeah, fair. And again, I'm not sure if I'm going to squeeze them into my squads. I'll have to see how I go. I've got some others I like, but definitely something just to mention and give a bit of a shout. Now, Dan Houston, are you interested in a Dan Houston at all, mate? He's someone who we haven't spoken about a lot this year, or we have spoken about, but maybe just haven't given him the respect he deserves. He's in some incredible form and really has only had one poor score this year. Could you be tempted into a Dan Houston?
I definitely think I could. Later on, when we look at my contender team, he's sitting in there as a bit of I call it my pod team. He's my pod play. Means that I'm not that keen on him, but I definitely want to get a piece of him somewhere. Obviously, coming up against Sydney this week, they are the 8th most restrictive team for opposition defenders. But actually, more recently, they've probably been a little bit slightly more positive than more neutral. Last week, we saw Luke Parker and Caleb Daniel both score 144 and 123 GDS points, respectively. And then obviously Cam Zerha as well. We looked at his heat map, and all in the defensive half was all for 128 GDS points. Week before, Bailey Dale scored 136. Obviously, is that key distributor for the Dogs before Buderick came back. So there's scores to be had against Sydney recently as the main ball users. And I think Houston's kind of taken over that role from Jacos. So he can score really quickly in patches due to the way Collingwood do use him. There was that passage of play against Hawthorn where he got mark, kick, handball, receive, kick, handball, receive, kick, handball, receive, kick. So that would have been like 20 points just in that one play, which was like 20 seconds. So he does have the ability to rack up quite quickly. And obviously did score 135 GDS points against Hawthorn, who are quite restrictive matchup for key opposition defender ball users. So look, like I said, don't mind it. I'm probably leaning towards Jaden Short, or probably even we're about to talk with Nick Newman, or even a John Noble probably come before Houston for me, but don't mind it.
Yeah, he's one exactly what you spoke about in terms of the little change in that Sydney matchup there, or maybe it's not so much a change, but just that there have been some scores against the Swans, and we probably can't rule that out, and he has to be spoken about as that option. Now, mate, there's heaps of comments coming here about my boy, Nick Newman, who I am not going to speak about again after tonight. I'm just going to let him play his game and keep my mouth shut and just hope he puts up another good score. Daniel Schloss loves the pick. We've also got, who have we got there? Nate Daddies as well. Doesn't trust Nick Newman. And then we've also got Izzy with a really interesting comment there about how might Carlton's coaching change this week impact Newman's role. Now, has his my 2 cents, and then you let me know what you think. I actually reckon that when we see a new coach come in, when there's a change during the season, the interim coach will just go back to what works, or we'll just go back to playing the players where they should be played. We saw Nick Newman last week get put up onto the wing for part of the game, and then he went back again and obviously had that tough Brisbane matchup for a 98, which is not bad at all. I reckon he just goes behind the footy this week, and I think he could be instrumental just personally, and also given the matchup as well. We know that the Dogs there are a really positive matchup, which we'll talk more about in a second. But that's kind of how I see his role playing out this week, and I think that change could be positive for him because it might just cement him as that key ball user. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely agree. I don't think he's going to be on the wing again this week. He's definitely their best ball user coming out of the back 50. I don't know why he got moved onto the wing at all last week. Obviously, when he did shift back behind the ball, the Blues started to look a little bit better and played with a little bit more dare, and he was the one that was really driving that. So yeah, we can just look at the scores the Dogs have conceded in the last couple of weeks. The Power, Kane Farrell, 146, and Logan Evans, 133 last week. And then the week before, it was Luke Ryan, 122, and Kurt Warner, 110. So yeah, plenty of scores going around.
So I think his kick-ins too. Like his kick-ins for me is another one. So even last week against the Lions, he still took 7 kick-ins. So to me, and the week before it was 6. So he takes the monopoly, or he takes the market share of those kick-ins. It was Adam Sard as well. Interesting, last week took 5 as well. Ollie Florent normally takes a couple, but it's definitely Nick Newman's the number one. And as I said, with that coaching change, I think that's not going to change either. So yeah, for that matchup against the Dogs, I think he's one I'm keen to play this week. And you can kind of look at that in his scoring too. If you go back and look at Newman in particular, I'll just pull up his scores for the season. But his scoring actually really nicely matches those positive matchups he's had. He's had the 2 so far from memory, the Collingwood and the St Kilda one. They've been his 2 pop scores. So he had 120 against Collingwood, where I mozzed him at halftime. That's where he was on 100. He was on 100 basically at halftime. And then he had 145 against the Saints. So I think if you're ever going to pick a Nick Newman, you have to pick him in these really positive matchups. So yeah, I'm going to have a crack this week, mate, and see how we go.
It probably doesn't obviously translate to GDS scores directly, but he seems to be so passionate about the club. On the weekend, there was a video review for us, touch behind, and he was just so frustrated that he couldn't get the ball and kick it back in straight away and like get the game going because there was the easy option available. And every time he seems to be either thinks he should deserve a free kick or gives away a free kick, he just seems so competitive and so wanting to put his best foot forward for the team. So I definitely think he's going to come out with a point to prove against obviously probably the easiest matchup for defenders to score against in the Dogs. So yeah, love it, mate. Great pod.
Yeah, and then quickly touching on our last one there as well, mate, like Kane Farrell, just flagging him there. He's playing in Darwin this weekend, so we saw some big scores there last week for defenders, more notably from the Suns boys, but obviously Sinclair went really well too. And he's coming off that huge 146 against that positive Bulldogs matchup. Now, the Suns aren't an amazing matchup on paper. Just keep that in mind. They're the 6th most difficult for our opposition defenders, but they're a positive matchup more specifically when you look at a designated ball user, that designated kicker. So looking at your DFS data, breaking down, those defender positions, they're actually better for a ball user. And in recent weeks, they've given up scores of 117 to Sinclair, 135 to Whitfield, 117 to Ash, 138 to Amon, and that goes on too. We've got Archie Roberts in there as well, who had 140 odds. So I think you can definitely be looking at a Kane Farrell this week as that designated kicker for Port Adelaide against this matchup at TIO. Definitely more of a point of difference, and I've probably got a lot ahead of him at the moment, but I definitely don't mind him at all this week. Throwing another one in there for you, mate. Someone else I thought about this week, who you see in my primetime team later on, is Nick Blakey, the Lizard. Almost throw a Callum Mills into that conversation too, if you want to target that Collingwood matchup there, if you want to look at a couple Swans. What are your thoughts on maybe a Farrell, a Blakey, potentially a Mills?
I'll touch on Farrell first. It was actually, I looked at him last week for the matchup against the Dogs as my bit of a pod, and I went elsewhere when looking into the research. But yeah, quite annoying to see him go so well. And obviously, once again, coming back to my decision to play Cal Wilkie for 26. When Nasai got ruled out, obviously that still would have been 120 points there for Farrell. But obviously the matchup was there, the role is there. Sometimes his scoring can be a little bit inconsistent. I've got him in a keeper league and I'm stoked to have him sitting there once again this week. But I'm probably not looking to go there this week. I think there's better options. When it comes to Blakey, he's only had the 3 scores over 100 this year, with obviously that really big pop score against the Giants where he scored 146. But outside of that, his next best was 112 against the Lions. So I mentioned with Jordan Clark, he's an All-Australian, one of the best halfbacks in the comp, but it just doesn't seem to translate to GDS points. And that's because his mark numbers and tackle numbers aren't high. He's got a season high 6 marks in a game. He is obviously reliant on heavy kick numbers. and lots of disposals to get that score going and even hitting the scoreboard as well. So I definitely don't think that Blakey has the consistency to go with some of these options on screen. And yes, he's got that ceiling there of 146, but it's so few and far between that I definitely don't want to touch that.
Yeah, I almost like a Tom McCarthy personally a little bit more against that Giants matchup as well. Definitely for Sundays, I'll be loading up some salary on him if I can.
I would prefer Callum Mills if you were to target the matchup. Obviously, don't have the data in front of me right at the moment, but he just seems to score better just for that fact that he does get marks and access to tackles as well. Doesn't probably get as many touches as Blakey, but Blakey gets a lot of handball receives, and that's how he really drives their forward.
Run and gun sort of player, hey?
Yeah.
And then obviously a Wayne Miller as well. We're sort of avoiding him for that North Melbourne matchup, being the third hardest, more recently. They're just they're not a matchup I'm looking to target at the moment, mate. They've really shown in recent weeks that they are a team who can be quite difficult to score against. He's been in great form though. Shout out to Miller. He's had 132 and 128 in his last couple, season average of 111, if you believe that or not. But the highest scores against North this year have been from a Whitfield, an Ash, and a Jaden Short. They've had 126, 129, 120. I just don't have him in that category of defender where I'm looking to target him against this matchup. So, yeah, he's one I think we're looking to avoid, mate.
All right, mate, I've got a question on screen for you. You're the one that's done the digging and diving into the defenders this week. If you had to choose one from Newman, Ryan, or Noble, who would it be for our good friend Mian?
Newman.
There we go. You've got
Newman. I'm going to play him in Classic as well. I'm pretty keen on. We had this discussion before about that last spot. Now, what are we going to do with that? And I went, I'm going to go Nick Newman. I'm really keen on him. I like him in these positive matchups. So he's one for me. John Noble 2, Luke Ryan 3, and Luke. Maybe that's being harsh on Luke Ryan too because he's got a huge ceiling. But yeah, I like Nick Newman personally.
Yeah, if anyone's seen my message in the Discord, I am chasing a bronze Nick Newman. That'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks for your help.
But they all should be good, shouldn't they? Some good matchups and some great form there too for those players. So having a look there in terms of our midfielders, mate, on screen, do you want to run us through what you're thinking there in terms of our plug and plays and our options?
Yeah, can do. So obviously we've got Nakos there. Obviously the Bont I mentioned last week, I faded him in all comps because there was that talk of might get in-game rest. Obviously sore knee, sore heel. Obviously he just came out and went bang. So I'm definitely never fading him again. That just ruined my week before it even started.
We've said that before.
Yeah, I know.
We've said that before.
Like I said, I think I was the scar last week for myself. Obviously, yeah, Baz there against the Lions, Holmes as well against the Lions, who's had a bit of a shift in his role recently. Jordan Dawson, as we mentioned earlier, was absolutely huge last week against the Tigers in his return game. He started at halfback and actually lined up against McKelty Lafau at some points and was playing as one of their main ball users off halfback, but then they really needed a lift. In the second half, he went into the midfield and absolutely dominated in that third quarter to put the game out of reach. And obviously Isaac Heaney, we've added him to the plug and plays this week. He had some attention last week from Simpkin, and he really just fought his way through to 112 GDS points thanks to that ability to hit the scoreboard where he kicked 3 goals. So it was only the second time this season he's failed to score 115 plus, where he's only one score under 100, being that 81 against the Lions when he was tagged by Jared Berry. He sat forward for quite a bit of the game. Obviously has that elite ceiling potential, scores of 150 and 170 this season. And then last 3 against the Pies resulted in scores of 120, 150 and 143 GDS points. And then the fifth best matchup of his career and the 5th easiest matchup for opposition midfielders. So I just think he's a plug and play, and you kind of just forget about it just based on that ceiling that he can possess on his day. Baz scored 150 points last week, and obviously Heaney has the ability to push forward as well. So expecting another good week for him. But just coming back to Max Holmes, he's probably the interesting one this week. If I'm looking to avoid anyone out of that plug and plays list, it's probably him. He's had a decrease of his CBAs from about 70% in the first coming weeks of the season, down to about 30% in the last 3. And I think even had 19 against the Eagles in gather round. and his scoring's kind of had a bit of a drop off as a result. Still getting plenty of the footy, but his mark numbers are definitely down, and kind of like a little bit like Nick Blakey, he's getting a lot of handball receives and really driving them forward with his ball use. A couple of weeks ago, he relied on kicking 2 goals late against North to really boost his score after playing at halfback for majority of the game. So coming into a matchup with the Lions, I know he scored really well in the grand final. He's had some success against them in recent years. I think I'm just looking to maybe go elsewhere based on some of the picks on screen, purely for that fact that it's the role at halfback, and obviously with a tricky matchup against Brisbane.
Well, it's interesting here too. Like Daniel Schloss in the chat mentions that there's some rumours around that Bailey Smith might be dealing with an injury and he could be a possible laid out. Geez, I haven't seen that before. If that potentially happens, surely Holmes goes back through the guts, right?
Well, you would think so. Obviously the team lists are in for Geelong. There's still Baz named in that team list. Obviously, you can take that with a grain of salt, knowing what Geelong are like. But yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on if true. But yeah, if Smith goes out and maybe it is Holmes that gets the boost, and maybe we have to do the switch there and go to Holmes.
Yeah. I mean, I probably like that, to be honest, if that was the case and that was going to happen. But yeah, if Baz is named, I'll play him for sure and just maybe keep an eye on it. Now, again, let's have a look here. Before we even touch on that, Sammy Walsh, I was just doing a bit of digging there into a Sam Walsh there. He stood out to me early this week in terms of someone who I might like to play. Been pretty consistent this season, but it's just his last couple of games where he's sort of been a little underwhelming in terms of his score. Like he's only had in his last two, 115 and 94. The Dogs aren't an amazing matchup for midfielders to target. They're currently, if we look at our Stats Lab data there as well, 7th hardest. So they don't really stand out for our opposition mids to be targeting. And Walsh hasn't had a great scoring against them. He's been pretty solid, I guess, around that 100 GDS mark, just over. But it's not screaming like one I want to target this week. I think there's a few other matchups first, although he may be that pretty safe score potentially.
Yeah, completely agree. Obviously, Sam Walsh, I think he was pretty good last week against the Lions. Don't have the numbers in front of me, but he seemed to really work his way to a decent score, and he always does.
Yeah, 150.
Yeah, so it's consistent. So definitely someone, if you're looking for reliable scores, then he's definitely there or thereabouts. But I just think the people on screen potentially have a little bit more upside. They might not have the consistency that Walsh possesses, but I'm definitely keen on some of these players this week.
Yeah, should be solid. Again, it's maybe that new coach factor you're going for there too, which I don't mind at all. I don't mind at all, especially for a player of Sam Walsh's talent. Now, mate, talk us through options there. Brayshaw, Sarong. Surely we're going Caleb Sarong, right?
So there's a couple, obviously, comments in the chat there around the two Dockers boys, and Mian's got there on screen. It's the biggest question for him. Out of the midfielders, and obviously Nate Daddy's there is Sarong, but he always picks the wrong one, and I definitely agree with him, and that's why I just default to not picking both of them, because I can never seem to get them right. I think I've nailed maybe one Caleb Sarong score in maybe the last 2 years, and Andy Bray obviously as well. It's kind of dropped off a little bit this season based on his scoring last year, which led to that All-Star card. But if we go into Caleb Sarong, he scored 123 GDS points last week, which was his highest score since round 4. He scored 120 plus in 4 games this season, but he's also gone under 100 4 times this season, which just highlights that up and down nature of his scoring. But he does possess an elite scoring ceiling, highlighted by his 145 and 152 against the Crows and Tigers, respectively. It was in this matchup last year where he scored 169 GDS points, thanks to 35 disposals, 5 marks, 4 tackles, and 2 goals. But that was at Optus Stadium. Last game he played against the Bombers at the MCG resulted in 110 GDS points. But they're saying that they are his 4th favourite matchup of his career. So all signs point to a decent Caleb Sarong game, and I'm definitely not against picking Caleb Sarong this week. And if we look at Brayshaw on the flip side, he's got a higher score of 120 GDS points against the Blues and Crows since round 4. His 3 scores under 100 this season were 68, 98, and 71. His last 2 matches against the Bombers have resulted in scores of 119 and 126. with that 126 being at the MCG. So both got recent history against the Bombers. Obviously, the Bombers are the easiest matchup for opposition mids at the moment, allowing 101.8 GDS points. And obviously, we know we don't have to go through all the scores against them, but there's been plenty of ceiling scores against the Bombers in the last 5 weeks.
Yeah.
So definitely a matchup to target. It's the questions whether you take one, you take both, or do you just take it and go, I'm not going to play either because it's too scary to try and pick the right one.
Yeah, I find it so hard as well. I'd probably default to Caleb Sarong in terms of the footballer and chasing that ceiling. Like, he's hit some of those bigger scores like you spoke about. Yeah, Andy Brayshaw, I don't know. I find it really hard because both of them go under 100 at the same time. So it's a scary one for me. I'm not sure. It's such a good matchup to target. So it is a really tough decision. But it might depend on your card as well. I know, I think Mian might have an all-star Brayshaw as well that he's got there too. So Mian, I'd be chucking that in a classic side if you can, or unless, I think they're on Sundays, aren't they? They're Sunday this week. So chuck him in maybe put him in your Sunday team there, Mian. Yeah, but I don't know. I might chase a ceiling score with Sarong. I'm not personally, just because, as you said, I never can pick them right, and I hate this decision, and they can both go under 100. But I think if you're picking one, maybe go Sarong and chase the ceiling.
Yeah, that's where I probably would land as well. At the moment in my teams later on, you'll see Sarong sitting in my contender side, but that's more of a pod decision this week. I'm definitely keen on others. Just so inconsistent, but he could pop 150 and it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, absolutely right. And do what Artie Booger does. Play neither, but play both on Sunday.
Love that. That's a great shout.
You still enjoy them. Yeah, still enjoy them. Go big.
All right, mate. Do you want
Zach?
I was going to say, do you want to talk us through Zach Butters? Because originally he was one that I wasn't really keen on, and you piqued my interest. So I dug a little bit deeper. Do you want to talk us through Zach Butters?
Yeah, I just think for Zachy Butters, I think he's just, he's such a good player, and he's been in such good form this season that we should be looking at him almost every week. The Suns are his third favourite matchup as well. So in his last two against them, he's had GDS scores of 176 and 160. And in those two games, he's had 35 touches, 10 marks, and about 4.5 tackles. So the stats are there historically for him. Now, the Suns they're a slightly negative matchup, very slightly for opposition mids. They're allowing about 88 points on average. But again, I think that's affected by some of those scores recently that have gone through the system. So maybe we won't read too much into that. But there are points available there at the same time. So, we've seen some big players, big names score quite well against them, like a Clayton Oller, for example, had 119. Callahan had 114. But, more interestingly, a Zach Merritt, for example, had 177 and Isaac Heaney a 170. So there's been really good ceiling scores. I think if you're looking at a player who can hit a ceiling score, it's a Zach Butters. And playing at TIO, we saw that was quite good last week. I don't think he's going to cop any attention against the Suns. That's not something they like to do. So I think whenever he's not copping attention, we have to be talking about him.
Yeah, definitely. The one flag that I did potentially think about was the fact that he's never played at TIO. And it just had the question, does it really potentially affect his scoring? But it's a relatively friendly venue for midfielders. Last season, allowed scores to Libba 156, Richards 152, Kennedy 133, and Newcomb 145 against the Suns in the two games at TIO last year. So points are plenty. Obviously, he's in great form. Obviously, he's trying to play for contract, play for money. He's the captain at the moment. He'll lead from the front. I definitely think it's another great pick this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably even on that too, like speaking about those really good players who, we really like most weeks as well. I think Zach Merritt this week too is probably another one who I'm really looking at playing. I know he's not there on screen, and I know Freo are not the best matchup to be targeting there for our opposition mids, but they have also given up a few big scores to players at the same time, just like what we sort of spoke about there for a Zach Butters. And going up against the Suns. So Freo have allowed Sam Walsh to have 157 points a couple of weeks ago. Matt Kennedy had 130. Bont and Richards also did really well too, 128 and 127. So there's scores there to be had. And I think, Merritt's only gone below 128 points once, and that was against the Pies for a really low score. That was just out of the ordinary. So I think how consistent he's been, like this could be a game where he goes quite large, and he's someone I'm quite confident in too. So I love a Zach Merritt this week alongside a Zach Butters.
Yeah, and I like the fact that it's at the MCG as well. More space for Merritt to really roam the ground. Obviously, his CBAs have taken a hit recently. He's kind of just floating and playing wherever he likes, and I definitely think the big spaces will suit that at the MCG. So I think regardless of the matchup, he should be good. There is a comment in the chat there from Daniel Slosh, worried about Dacos getting tagged by James Jordan. So I'll just come back to that one quickly. Obviously, we were really concerned last week about the best tagger in the game in Mullen, and Dacos still fought his way to 112. So I think I'm pretty happy to roll him out again this week regardless. It's probably more the question, if you are worried about that tag, how much salary are you putting on him? But if we look last week against North, he did start on Harry Sheasel and then went over to LDU after LDU had a red-hot start to the game. Both of those players ended up with 148 and 137 GDS points respectively. So I don't think James Jordan's at the same caliber as a Mullen at the moment, tag-wise. I think he's kind of dropped off just a little bit. I know he was one of the premier taggers in the competition. I'm not going to say that it wouldn't surprise me to keep him under 100, but I just don't see how Dacos could score so well against a Mullen and then come back to earth against a Jordan. I think Mullen's head and shoulders above Jordan at the moment as the comp's best tagger. So I'm definitely playing Dacos this week.
Yeah, so am I, mate. And I might even have a quick look too in terms of a Nick Dacos. Those last couple of times he's come up against the Swans more recently, and when he's faced that James Jordan matchup, like I even think like he hasn't kept him to much. Like last year, round 5, 2025, he had 155 points against them. The year before in round 22, 2024, that was his low score of 88. And then round 1 of that year, he had 144. So, yeah, it's not something I would be too concerned about. It just might be a question of salary for sure.
Yeah, love that.
But LDU, he's burnt me before, mate. I can't play an LDU, I don't think. But what have you found in terms of Luke Davies-Uniacke and why coaches could be targeting him this week? Is that purely because of the Adelaide matchup there?
Well, as I just mentioned, he burst out of the block. He started like a house on fire with a 52-point GDS first quarter last week where he gathered 13 disposals. And that meant that Sydney had to, flick James Jordan across from Shees onto LDU to try and quell that influence on the game. And it's quite interesting because obviously he was in doubt to play last week due to that potential hamstring injury that he did sustain the week before, but he definitely showed no signs of discomfort throughout the game. Like I mentioned, he scored 137 GDS points despite being the third hardest matchup for midfielders and dealing with a bit of attention from Jordan. That's the third time he's passed 125 GDS points for the season. In their last matchup in round 24 last year, he did score 125 GDS points, and that was at Marvel Stadium. But at the last matchup in their first matchup last season at the Adelaide Oval, and he scored the 81. So that's potentially something to keep in mind as well. Bit of inconsistent scoring, maybe based on venue. Obviously, they are playing at Adelaide Oval this week. The Crows are the fourth easiest matchup for opposition midfielders, currently allowing 93.6 GDS points. In the last 3 weeks, they've allowed Jack Ross 105, Wines and Butters 134 and 131, and then obviously Neil and Washi went 185 and 156. So there's plenty of points on the table. I definitely don't mind it. He's probably more of a pod pick, more than Sarong and Butters, but I definitely think he could do worse than an LDU this week.
Do you remember when we played him this year? What round that was?
Yeah, that was against the Tigers.
Tigers, yeah, round 6.
Yeah, he fought his way to, was it 112 or
107?
Yeah, something like that.
107. Yeah, he could just do that sometimes. Like he should be really good, and then he will just do something that just underwhelms you. But yeah, I don't mind that at all because he is probably one of their best midfielders, obviously outside of Harry Sheasel, who can do everything. But I'm assuming you just put that question there on screen from Arnie Booger. Who is Oisin Mullen going to this week? Who is he going to clamp? Because he is the best tagger in the competition. I think if you're going to flinch at one, if you're going to flinch at a tagger, I think you're going to flinch at Oisin Mullen. And I think we've got him on screen, Lockie Neal. I think that it's clear. I think he's not going to anybody else. There's nobody else he can go to. They were saying that like this is the best form Lockie Neal's been in since 2019 or something, his Brownlow year. So yeah, his dominance at stoppage and his ability to win clearance and not just accumulate the footy, but be so damaging with what he's doing is standing out. And I just think that they're going to be going after him pretty hard this week. I think Mullen will go to him. I think that he'll try and clamp him. And one thing I've seen from Lockie recently is that if he does cop a tag or he cops attention, he can put up a pretty poor score. So he's one I'm pretty keen to avoid this week in particular. Do they, mate?
No, I think you've nailed it on the head. Even without the tag, the Cats are the 5th hardest matchup for opposition midfielders, allowing 86.3 GDS points. And the Cats are his 2nd worst matchup for his career. So he doesn't have success against them. Obviously, we know he did come off the bench in that grand final and had that score of 76 in that half of game. But obviously, yeah, like you mentioned, he's probably in the form, best form he's been in for 5-6 years now. Obviously, we know Mullen has done a job on Hugh McCluggage in the past, but obviously Hugh's been dealing with a bit of a calf injury to start the season. He's still building his time on ground, hasn't really hit his stride just yet. So I think, if anything, it's between Neil and Will Ashcroft. And I think just the way Neil's playing, his ability to get the clearance, get the first hands on footy and really be damaging and set up the play from the stoppage means that they'll definitely want to put some attention into him. And I definitely think he gets the tag.
I think the Cats aren't going to let what happened in that second half of the grand final happen again. And I think Will Ashcroft, there's zero chance of him tagging a Will Ashcroft for the reason that he's much harder to tag because he'll start on the bench or he'll start half forward or he'll start somewhere you just don't expect. And then he'll come into the middle throughout the game. So I think it'll just be easier for them to go, let's just lock away Lockie Neal. And I'm pretty keen to avoid that. I'm not going to flirt with danger there. I really hope he has a good score because it'll mean the Lions probably go quite well, but I'm not going to be a betting man on that one. And let's quickly power through those couple pods there on screen, mate. We got a Nando. I was on that last week. I was ahead of the game. I already played him, mate. I played him in Challenger last week.
Here we go.
I think I might roll him out again this week. Obviously, he's had a couple of good scores recently too. He had 138 last week. That was, his highest score of the year. He hasn't been amazing before that. And I guess in terms of this matchup, it's maybe not the best on paper if you look historically for a Nando, but they're the 7th easiest matchup for opposition mids to score against. And if we talk about the TIO factor as well, if he's playing good footy up there, I reckon we can definitely go there. And I don't mind a few of those scores other teams have had against him too. So 161 from the Bont, but put Bont in his own category, right? Maybe don't read into that one too much. We're not expecting a 161. But an Ed Richards has had a 128, 122 to Fraser, Jared Berry, 177. So there's scores to be had. If you're looking to target a Gold Coast mid, I think you're probably looking at a Noah Anderson.
Did you just say Jared Berry?
Was that a Jared Berry?
No, it was
Sam Berry.
Sam Berry in the showdown. Yeah, Sam Berry where he had 19 tackles.
Yeah, that's going to help.
Yeah, definitely. But
Jared Berry on the mind.
Yeah, no, I had to, obviously, coming off his highest score of the year, as you mentioned, I think he is definitely a play in a pretty easy matchup. Well, not easy, but relatively neutral. I think he's just looking to show some form at the right time after a little bit of injury concerns to start the year. But yeah, obviously, great pull by you, not only having his legend, but obviously the pull yesterday with Finn Callahan as well, who I think is another great play this week against West Coast. So yeah, mate, you are definitely kissed to have those two sitting in your challenger team this week because I definitely think they're going to go well again. And I'll just quickly touch on Ed Richards, kind of talking about injury concerns. He was getting plagued by a couple weeks ago, but he's had scores of 128 and 127 in his last 2 matches, and he only has the 2 scores under 105 GDS points for the season, which were 97 against the Giants and 85 against the Swans. So doesn't really seem to go relatively low too often. He's shown elite ceiling, scores of 149 against the Cats and 162 against the Lions, who are both normally restrictive matchups and negative for opposition midfielders. He's facing the Blues this week, who are allowing the 3rd most GDS points to opposition mids, allowing 94.2 GDS points on average this season. Last week, Lockie Neal scored 146, while another 4 Lions mids went over 105 GDS points. They've also allowed ceiling scores to Shea Bolton, 158, Nakos, 146, Pat Lipinski, 127, and Rankin, 131 over the last 5 weeks. So definitely, obviously, going to have Bont in my sides, and I just love watching Ed Richards play, and he could have a field day alongside Bont this week. But obviously, we've mentioned it before. Just watch out for that new coach curse. The Blues could come out hungry and really potentially pull an upset in a bounce back performance. So just potentially tread carefully there. But I think Richards would be great once again.
Yeah.
And just going to quickly move to the chat there. Michael Cossey's just joined us, and I'm absolute dope and faded the Bont last week. Never again, I learned my lesson. Don't worry, mate. We talked about that at the start. We learned our lesson plenty of times before. However, we still did it. But hopefully we've learned our final lesson this time around, because we were with you in fading the Bont there.
It's one of those picks, though. It's a good process, right? Like, you're not going to pick a player who is, not 100%, not moving well. They talk about heel issues, knee issues, hand issues, every issue under the sun. It potentially resting. Like, it didn't add up to be a pick you maybe wanted to go and chase, but it's the Bond. So
it's the Bond.
Lesson learned, Superman. But, mate, let's move on to the rucks there. We've got a few on screen. 4 options we could be looking at. And there's a bit of team news this week too that could make it quite interesting. Before we get into that team news, we've just got to start with LJ. We've got to start with, arguably probably the best form in the competition at the moment in terms of those ruckmen. We saw Grundy put up a really floor score last week, but Jacko's just been getting it absolutely done. He came out and scored 144 GDS points on the Hawks. And he was the highest scoring ruck for the week. So he had another 74% CBAs, 70% ruck contests without Sean Darcy in the side. Even though Mason Cox is there, the way they work together and the roles for each of them, it's just perfect for a Luke Jackson. And I think from now on, until Sean Darcy comes back in the side, you have to be considering Luke Jackson every single week as one of your options. And even since he's gone down, some of those scores, he's had 139, 112, 148, 141, 148. So, clearly number one ruck in the competition, does everything. He's the unicorn. And coming up against the Bombers this week, who are a bit of a neutral matchup for opposition rucks, they're still a great matchup for mids and just everywhere around the ground. And I think you could be easily picking a Luke Jackson this week pretty comfortably.
Do you remember the last time he played the Bombers as the sole ruck?
Yep, 160 something last year. I remember I played him in a couple formats and I was very happy. I think I VC'd him in one format for that game too. And I strolled into work on Friday morning and was very happy. I was. So
166 GDS points thanks to 21 disposals, 3 goals, and 48 hitouts. The last time he was sole ruck against the Bombers last year. That was against Vicentini. Obviously,
Optus too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was at Optus. Obviously, he'll be rucking against Peter Wright. And Nick Bryan as well has just come into the side. But I definitely think that's going to be hard to ignore Jackson this week.
Oh, if he's put up 144 against Meek and Reeves, who are arguably one of the hardest matchups in the competition, you can't be turning yourself away from a Bombers matchup.
Yeah, well, look, Briggsy managed to score 95 GDS points last week. So if Briggsy can do that...
It's 150, 160 for Jacko.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say add another 100 on top of that. But as we mentioned, the couple team list news that have come out today, we'll talk about Brodie Grundy first. The team list news there is no Darcy Cameron for Collingwood, which means that Oscar Steen will be their sole ruck. Whether they go with a backup or not is still to be seen, but he'll be their main ruck. Obviously, I've mentioned Grundy coming off his equal worst score of the year in his 61 GDS points last week. But the Pies are a neutral matchup for opposition rucks to score against, allowing 79 GDS points on average. In the last 5 weeks, they've allowed 102 points to Ned Reeves, 104 points to Mark Pitnett, and 139 points to Luke Jackson. And I definitely think that Grundy would be closer to Jackson in his scoring ability compared to those others that I just mentioned. So I definitely think he'll be a great option once again. And obviously without Darcy Cameron there, he doesn't have to worry about a duo there. At home this season, Grundy has scores of 147, 135, and that 61-point performance against the Lions. In his last 3 matches with the Pies, he's only got scores of 111, 94, and 69, which suggests it's not really a great matchup for him. But obviously, I think he's one of the best ruckmen in the comp. We know he's the pig. I definitely expect a big bounce back from him this week.
Yeah, and I think we have to at home as well. That's, nothing had really changed last week too much anyway. Like he still had same time on ground. His ruck contests were pretty much exactly the same. Time on ground very similar. So if nothing changes, you almost kind of have to back them in again if they've got a good matchup. And yeah, with Darcy Cameron being out, I think I'm pretty happy to lock him away, mate, and play him. And it seems as simple as a Grundy and an LJ.
Well, that's what I was thinking too before the team list, or not team list, but news broke this afternoon from Adelaide training that Mick Andrew actually did not train and is in a bit of a doubt to play this weekend against Tristan Sherry and the North Melbourne Kangaroos. So if Mick Andrew was to be ruled out, I think Sherry could be the pick of the week. He managed to just sneak over 100 GDS points last week against the Swans. He did have a drop in his CBAs, 86% down to 73%, and time on ground was 81% down to 67% last week. But I think that was probably more to do with the fact that Brodie Grundy was actually dominating that ruck battle. Tristan Sherry obviously is the best ruckman at North by far, and I expect those numbers to bounce back up this week. He's gone past 100 GDS points in all games except for that one, which was obviously that brain fade game that we've mentioned multiple times before. And it's actually quite interesting when we look at his scores. He's either just scrapping his way to just over 100 points, or he goes monstrous and scores 150 plus. So there doesn't seem to be anything in between. And that pretty much just comes back down to his tackle numbers. If he can get to 10 tackles, he's going to have 150 points. If he gets anything below 5 tackles, he'll be around that 100-point mark. So the Crows are his fourth favourite matchup of his career. In the last matchup against the Crows, he scored 174 GDS points. So we just talked about Jackson's 166, and Sherry just goes, hold my beer. I'm going to go 174. He had 25 disposals, 35 hitouts, and 12 tackles in that performance. But saying that in that other game last season against the Crows, he only scored 89. So there's only 100 points difference between those two performances. And they were both against Riley O'Brien. So obviously if Mick Andrew doesn't play, it remains to be seen whether O'Brien comes in or they persist with Murray as potentially the ruckman with maybe some help elsewhere. Obviously, team list news will be really important when it comes to that tomorrow afternoon. But the Crows have been a neutral team for opposition rucks, allowing 78.2 GDS points on average, which makes them the 9th easiest matchup to target. And if Mick Andrew does get named and we're looking at that matchup, he's allowed scores of 111 to Jordan Sweet and 113 to Rowan Marshall in the last 5 weeks, but no other ruck has gone over 85. So I'm not keen if Mick Andrew is named, but if Mick Andrew isn't named, then I am super keen.
It'd be interesting to see if Rob comes in, Riley O'Brien. Surely they would have to name him if McAndrew is out, you would think. They can't be rolling a Toby Murray as the ruck against Tristan Sherry. Like that can't happen. They'd have to go Riley O'Brien.
You wouldn't think so. I definitely think that if you were Riley O'Brien, you would feel very hard done by if the starting ruck was not named and you still couldn't get a look in. So I definitely think that's where they'd look to for sure.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting, hey. And Gawn still ruck sharing with a Max Heath. Played mainly forward last week against the Eagles as well, just like the week prior. And his CBAs were much the same, so 46% last week. And his ruck contests, they dropped to 52% from 60% the week before. So the role's just not good when you're looking at some of the other rucks like a Luke Jackson and a Brodie Grundy and a Tristan Sherry. I think we almost can't be looking at a Max Gawn until we see that role change. It's interesting, though, in his last 3 games against the Hawks, he's had scores of 151, 128, and 126 for that 3-game average of 135 GDS points. So the previous form suggests that, yes, he should be a pick against this team, but the role and the current form says no, we can't be picking him thinking we'll get those scores this week because he's not in that same role. He was the solo ruck in those times and those previous times he scored. If a Max Heath was out, maybe I would think about it. But I do just kind of feel the other rucks are the ones we should be going for this week.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. If we look at the squad tracker on Stats Lab, for all standard competitions, Max Gawn is currently the most popular ruck at sitting at 38.3%. Now, obviously, we can take that with a grain of salt. Some coaches potentially haven't set their teams yet for tomorrow. And obviously, it was a juicy matchup for him last week. But it's interesting to see that he's got a 7% lead over Brodie Grundy, who's the second most popular coach for all standard competitions. So, yeah, it's definitely not for me. I'm definitely leaning towards, obviously, as you can see on screen, Grundy and Jackson, and depending on team lists, maybe Tristan Sherry as well. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, and if that happens, I think if McAndrew is out, then I'm going to try and probably split those 3 rucks across all competitions. We know Darcy Cameron is confirmed out, and I don't even think they have another ruck they can name. I think they would have to go on Oscar Steen as the solo ruck. So, yeah, I'm probably keen on a Grundy and a Jackson, and then followed closely by a Tristan Sherry, and yeah, throw him somewhere where I can, maybe. Point of difference, keep an eye on a Rowan Marshall as well, just as someone there. So he's got the Richmond matchup there this week. And just, yeah, obviously with that role this year, they're still rolling with a Tom De Koning there. But he's had scores of, this is Rowan Marshall, he's had scores of 80, 147, 90, and 113 since round 5. So had a very slow start to the season, but has put up some pretty decent scores. And the Tigers are the 5th best matchup for opposition opposition rucks. They're allowing the 5th most points. And in the past weeks, we've seen some okay scores to some rucks against them. Obviously, Gawn's probably the anomaly there. He's the clear premier ruck that's come up against them, but only had the 104. That was that first game with Max Heath. So that was a ruck share role too. I just think that if you want a bit of a pod play in the ruck, I think you have to look at a Rowan Marshall if you want to go that way, because he's had 152, 138, 168, and 153 against the Tigers in his last 4. Loves playing against the Tigers. They're a great matchup for forwards as well as rucks. We know he's playing predominantly forward, so we're probably not expecting like a score like that again. But I just think if you want to look for someone very left field, it has to be a Rowan Marshall.
Yeah, look, obviously it would take a really bold play, and it would take a really good performance from Rowan Marshall, potentially something to happen to TDK to put him alongside those big dogs up the top there. But definitely not for me this week. I definitely think we've got 3 clear options, and that's pretty much it there.
Yeah, for sure. Now let's smash out these forwards, mate. We have 4 plug and plays there on screen. So we're Harry Sheasel, Cozzy Pickett, Christian Petrarca, and Bradley Hill. Welcome to the plug and plays in the forward line. Very consistent start to the season. That's what we look for. We look for consistency amongst our forwards, but that it's also that consistent ability to go above 100. So, yeah, he's in there now, and just absolutely incredible form. So I think we should be playing him again this week, particularly against the Tigers. Speaking of another Saint, though, mate, we took him out of the plug and plays last week, and whack. How's that for a rocket? I'm glad I played him because I thought he'd go well in his revenge game against the Suns up at TIO. And to be fair, I think his score might have been a bit inflated. I think Nazaya being out probably helped that ceiling score. I think if Nazaya was in the side getting his CBAs, it might have been a little bit different. Because his CBAs went from 25% the week before to 52% last week, which is his highest CBA attendance rate since round 5. So, and funnily enough, he still snuck down back to take 2 kick-ins. So he, on his day when he wants to be, he's a pig. It just so happened to align last week. It was a revenge game, and he got the bump in CBAs with Naz being out. Having Naz confirmed out now makes me really excited about what he could do. You would assume that's going to continue from last week. So he's another lock again in your forward lines. And we know what the Tigers are giving up to those opposition mids/mid forwards. Like even Rankin last week, 190. Probably don't expect that. That's just out of the box, right? But Dawson had 160. Even the Eagles, they had Elliot Yeo, 119 against them. Cozzy Pickett had 164 against them. Like there's scores everywhere. So I think Sam Flanders should be really good again this week, and I don't see a reason why he won't be a great pick.
Yeah, completely agree. And geez, yeah, whack, all right. Another one that I didn't play in my classic side. So that's just another great memory there from last week, and another poor decision by myself. But no, you were absolutely right. It was your revenge game, and all signs pointed to a good performance. Definitely should have followed with that pick there. But yeah, definitely look at the Tigers this week. He could be anything. He could be another 140-point performance, and maybe it's a question of, do you actually put any salary on him and maybe make the most of that matchup?
Yeah. I thought about that before, actually, just with that, having a bit of a think about the desired news being out. I actually may try throw a tiny bit of salary on him, maybe even just a silver in Classic could be really handy. Just as a few extra points if he does hit that ceiling score, possibly. Have to think about that. I don't know if I'll put more on him. I think there's other players I want to put something on, but yeah, something to keep in mind.
Yeah, without a doubt. And obviously another one there who was great last week in another juicy matchup was Toby Green. He scored 120 points last week against the Bombers. And interesting, he was back in the CBA rotation. He got dumped the week prior, only had 9% CBAs, but then he got bumped back up to 53% last week. So we can only assume that's going to continue. And maybe that's to do with a little bit of decrease for Lockie Ash as well. There's probably a little bit of a bit of a relationship there between whether Ash is in and Green is in. They probably don't want to have both of them in at the same time. Obviously, he's playing West Coast this week. He's the third best matchup for opposition forwards this season and the second best matchup in the recent weeks. We're talking the last 5 weeks. Regardless, West Coast are going to be a good matchup for forwards and mids, and they've been a happy hunting ground for Toby in recent matchups. 2025, he's got 120 GDS points. He kicked 3 goals in that game, and he also had 4 behind, so it could have been a lot more. And then in round 4 last season, he had 147 GDS points from another 3 goals. So they're his third best matchup across the course of his career. He's in great form. Last week, West Coast gave up points to Ed Langdon, who's got 136, Tom Sparrow 109. And then the week before, Richmond, Seth Campbell's got 110 and Ross 108. So there's plenty of points there to be had against West Coast in recent weeks. I think I'm locking Toby Green into my sides, but maybe the bit of a scare there is the fact that GWS have been struggling, and it's a genuine danger game for them over there in the West, especially given the fact that they nearly lost at home to the Bombers. But obviously we expect them to win, and we know that Toby will be hungry to get them over the line as captain as well. He'll definitely have a point to prove. I can definitely see Toby being in pretty much all of my sides this week.
I liked him for that. Obviously, last week I liked him, but the week before against the Suns, I liked him when they went up there, and he actually really struggled, particularly in the first half and 3 quarters. But he's still got 91. So, yeah, I really like that he's got that. He can find a way to score even if the game's not going his way. That was the game where he lost those CBAs. So, yeah, I think he should be a great pick again this week. But what about an Isaac Rankin? He's coming off 190 points, and we know they're coming up against the North Melbourne Kangaroos. I'm really worried this week. Everything says you should pick him. He has the role. He's playing midfield. There's been a clear swap with Josh Rochelle. All right, we've seen that the CBAs for Josh Rochelle have gone down to 15% and 19% in the last 2 weeks. The CBAs for Rankin, 74% and 73%. They've done a complete swap, and it mirrors their scoring in recent weeks too. I do think the 190 for Isaac Rankin is just a pop score, and I think that is
highest score of his career.
Yeah,
by a long way.
By a little bit. Yeah, massive. So just coming up against North Melbourne, it's like, is it a complete fade? Like, could he actually cop attention? Because we know they can deploy a couple taggers. I'm not sure if they send someone to a Jordan Dawson. They might have someone who's going to spend some time and give him some attention. But I don't know. I think Rankin's the one you want to shut down. I think he's the match winner for Adelaide.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I think if anyone is to cop the tag, it would be Rankin. It's just a matter of whether it's Finn O'Sullivan or Jai Simpkin that goes to him, and maybe they might do a job each. Might be a Rankin and a Dawson that get some attention.
And can they shut him down though? Is probably the other question.
Well,
can they?
Yeah, well, obviously we know that Rankin is susceptible to a tag. Obviously, he got tagged by Mullen earlier this year for 36 GDS points. And I know that was early on, coming back from an interrupted preseason and his suspension that loomed at the start of the season as well. But first or second game back for 36 is not very good. But obviously, Isaac Heaney showed last week that with an ability to push forward, you can still get to a respectable score. He scored that 112, which he kicked 3 goals in that. So maybe even if Rankin does get some attention, he might do a bit of a spot with Rochelle and really push forward and try and impact the scoreboard that way. But that's obviously scary in itself, that you become reliant on him kicking goals in order to score well. So it's definitely one that at the moment
That's
Yeah,
tough.
at the moment, I don't have him in any of my sides, which obviously, if the tag doesn't go there, I think he scores well. But obviously, the problem is if he cops a tag, he could be in for a really tough day and it could be a really low score. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It could make or break the week, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm scared about that one. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do either. Like, yeah, we might have to avoid that tag, given that he can go forward potentially and swap with a Rochelle. We've seen him give up that floor score, like you mentioned. But on the flip side, he's hit 137 and 113 in his last two against them. So it is really tough. I don't really see a world where they don't put someone on him.
Yep.
Yeah, so just be aware, coaches. If you were playing an Isaac ranking this week, just consider he could cop attention and what might that look like. And that's probably the decision we're going to have to make too, mate. But in terms of somebody else as well, there on screen, looking at a couple pods, we'll knock these guys out nice and quick. Connor McDonald, this one hurt to put on screen after his 54 last week. He was terrible, but it wasn't a great matchup, and I shouldn't have gone there in the first place. Lesson learned. But he's back at the MCG this week, where he's yet to go under 100 this season. He's had scores of 103, 103, 124, and 135. And he's a genuine point of difference. He's around that 10 to 12 most popular forward across your standard competitions. So he's definitely a point of difference. But Freo just completely shut him down last week. Like, he got 0 marks, which is just a stark contrast to anything else he's done this season. So I see that game as an anomaly. The role was there. Like, it hadn't changed. He was still playing that high half forward role. The one thing I did notice was that Freo obviously won. They really challenged Hawthorn, and that's probably the first time this year where Hawthorn were really pushed like that. They took that uncontested marking game away, which hurts Connor McDonald. And coming back this week to the MCG against Melbourne, who are a positive matchup for those opposition mids and forwards, and also to Connor McDonald in the past, I think he can be an option again this week. And as I said, it's more of a point of difference. Last time he played them at the end of last year, he had 136 GDS points, thanks to 28 disposals, 10 marks, and 1 goal. That's kind of been what he's been doing this year. So I think, like, if you've been keen on a Connor McDonald like myself in the this season, this is probably the week to play him, and it probably wasn't last week.
Yeah, look, if he's back at the MCG, the scoring pedigree's there. Like you said, the game style just suits at the MCG.
Same as a Guinea as well.
Yeah, Guinea's probably another great option once again. I think you're probably relying on consistent performances from any of the Hawthorn boys. Obviously, I know Cal's out there and he's got a grudge with Dylan Moore. Probably won't be leaning towards him, but McDonald or Guinea, definitely great shouts. And obviously, the matchups there against Melbourne this week, who are, even though they're going well, are still giving up points to forwards. So don't mind that at all. Before we talk about the other one on screen there, we've got Nate Daddy's in the chat. What about Connor Buderick? Obviously returned last week from injury and scored that 130 points, like you mentioned, against the Power. Look, definitely could be a great shout. Carlton are a pretty good matchup for forwards. I'm just bringing it up.
I actually have that here too. They are not a bad matchup across the season. So if you look across the full season, the Blues there are... Where are they? Yeah, pretty neutral, actually, sort of middle of the pack in terms of what they're giving up. But if you actually look recently in the last 3 games, they're giving up less than what you think. They're actually the 7th hardest matchup in recent times. And we saw last week the Lions, we picked a few of them, mate, as our points of difference and as our picks, being a Dane Zorko and a Darcy Wilmot.
Even Jasper Fletcher was underwhelming for 22s.
Yeah, like they just really, really struggled. And that's the thing that concerns me. And we've talked about the new coach game as much as you want. But if I actually look at Buderick's scoring, he's gone 130. And then before he got injured, so round 5, 74, 102 before that, 78 before that. It's up and down. It's up and down for me. I think I want to watch. I like the pick, Nate Daddies. I like the shout because I've been eyeing him off as well. Whenever you've got a forward playing a different role where they're going to get their hands on the footy, you have to look at them, right? But I think for me, I want to watch Connor Buderick. I need to have eyes on that game as well to see how they use him. I still think Bailey Dale's the man. I think if you're going for a dog, it's probably Bailey Dale. Obviously, they're selected in different lines. I understand that. But I'm keen just to watch a Connor Buderick this week personally.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I think obviously last week's probably a bit of a pop score, but like you mentioned, it's sometimes a luxury to have someone playing in a different position, especially as a halfback flanker, eligible as a forward in GameDay Squad.
10
It
marks.
sometimes can be gold. So yeah, look, if he could even cut that in half to 5 marks in a tougher matchup against Carlton, maybe this week he might still score well. But yeah, maybe it's more of a pop score than anything. And I think you're right. I would want to see it again and it'd be more consistent now that he's returned from injury before I even look to go there, because I think there are some really good options this week. And I think Shea Bolton is one of those really good options. We've already talked about how positive the Bombers are across all positions, really. And they're the third easiest matchup for opposition forwards in the past 3 weeks and the easiest midfield matchup across the course of the season. Bolton's still attending half of the team's CBAs, and this attendance has been consistent all season, even with Hayden Young coming back into the side in recent weeks. Speaks to how much they're valuing him in there and the spark that he brings the side, kind of like a little bit like an Isaac Rankin does for Adelaide. The Bombers just give up 120 points to Toby Green last week, who played a very similar role, 18 disposals and 3 goals. But even Brent Daniels also scored well and had 94 GDS points. They also conceded 143 GDS points to Zach Bailey the week before, who once again plays a very similar high half forward role with less CBAs. The only concern that this week he hasn't really had a great history against the against the Bombers. He's had 64 in round 15 last season at Optus, which we know that he does have that floor score in him. And he was also injured the game prior on 96 GDS points. So he did have a big game on them the time before that in 2024, but I think this is the pick where you're looking more at his current form, the role and what the opposition are giving up to these types of players. And I think Shea Bolton, obviously we saw that ceiling score against Carlton a couple of weeks ago, 158. Maybe that could be potentially on the cards once again in a positive matchup.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely could look at him. I still got to think if I can sneak him in somewhere or where I can. I'll be looking at that if I can. And I think avoiding a Josh Rochelle, I think you can't touch him just given what we have seen. But in saying that, it probably wouldn't surprise me if Rankin cops attention. Maybe they have someone that runs with Dawson. It just wouldn't surprise me if it works out to be a game where he kicks a few goals. Like he had that game a couple of weeks ago where he had 2 goals, 3, I think it was, and scored an 84. Like it was.
Yeah, that was the showdown.
Yeah, 3/4 time it was looking really good, and he scored like a couple points in the last quarter. So, yeah, it's been underwhelming with that role change. But this one, as much as I'm saying avoid him and I'm not playing him anywhere, I could just see this being a game where, Rankin cops attention and it just works out to be a game that suits him. But I've got no confidence in him, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm not touching Josh Rochelle. I played him as a pod last week in Contender, and that definitely backfired. So, yeah, look, if you're willing to take on one of the Adelaide forwards, it's Rankin, and you're just taking on the risk that he doesn't get tagged. But I definitely wouldn't touch Rochelle regardless. Now, there is one player that we haven't touched on. Obviously, he has the scoring pedigree, and he's been one of our options pretty much every week. Obviously, he was a bit underwhelming last week, but that is Zach Bailey. Pretty good matchup for him against Geelong. He scored well against them in the past, averaging 105 in his past 5 games, including that 6. A massive score if everything went his way, and probably a Norm Smith medal to suit. He's a gun and just expect him to bounce back. We often say we can't take these guns out of our sides after one poor performance. And obviously, we're backing in Grundy to bounce back this week. We're backing in probably Zach Bailey as well to do the same. Surely, maybe the one potential flag is we know that the Cats do sometimes tag 2 players from the opposition, and have done it previously against the Lions that tag Cam Rayner and Hugh McCluggage in the past. And obviously, they use Mullen and Mark O'Connor to do that.
Yeah.
But surely he doesn't get any attention. I just think they'll put their attention into maybe a Neil, maybe a Will Ashcroft, and like you said earlier, maybe a Zorko. But yeah, I think Zach roams free, given his explosiveness. I just think you just got to back in the scoring pedigree, the ability to impact the scoreboard. And yeah, I'm liking the matchup again this week.
Yeah, especially at the Gabba as well. So someone else I'm going to try to squeeze into my side for sure. Arnie Booger as well. Good question there. Will the Hawks give Cozzy attention? I think absolutely. I think every team has to give Cosy attention. I'm not sure who they might send to him, but I'm going to back him in to bounce back from that poor score. And might not put salary on him just given the Hawks matchup are typically a bit difficult, but he's just such a good player. And strike up last week is a bit of an anomaly. He had that incident in the first quarter where who did he run into? He ran into someone high, didn't he? Copped them really high.
Jake Waterman in the first 30 seconds of the game.
That's right. And it seemed to have rattled him. Well, that's some of the commentary that I've heard around it as well. But they'll definitely send someone to him and give him some attention. But I think he's just that good a player that we back him in and just maybe consider what salary we're putting on him in certain competitions.
Before we do move on, there is one more that I would like to flag, and that is Brian Myers, who has been named to return for the Geelong Cats tomorrow night against the Lions. Obviously, he was touted maybe for ACL surgery. Obviously, they decided not to do that, and he came back through the VFL last week and looked really good. So obviously, he returns to the side. But obviously, on his day, he's a gun, and he's definitely in that plug-and-plays list. But I want to watch and see just for a week. Obviously, tough matchup against Brisbane. He might be potentially be on managed minutes as well. So definitely I'll wait and see on that one for future weeks.
Yeah, 100%. I'm happy to watch that one myself. Now, here are our contender sides as well for everyone to have a bit of a look at. So you can see on screen who we have in our back lines, probably very similar there as well, mate. In fact, I think we are the same, aren't we there? Yeah, it's exactly the same. Probably just salaries, what's going to differ across competitions. And we're going to be splitting a lot of players across our Contender, Classic, and Challenger side. So we've got a Dan Houston here. We've got a Nick Newman in Classic, for example. I think I've got him in Challenger too, but just splitting a few of those defenders across our comps. Midfield's looking very similar. You're going to have a go to Caleb Sarong there, and I was actually thinking of the same thing in Contender, but I've got Max Holmes there because I don't think I have him in my Classic side. So that's probably a difference that we have there through the midfield.
I've also got Dawson.
Yeah, and who have I got there?
You got Merritt.
Yeah, Zachy Merritt. I'm pretty keen on a Zach Merritt this week, so I'm going to lock him in. And then I'm playing a Jordan Dawson in Classic and Challenger. So, just kind of splitting those players there. We've both got LJ and Grundy in our ruck positions. And then you can see I've got Zach Bailey there in the forward line while you've got Zach Bailey as well, sorry.
I've gone Connor McDonald.
Connor McDonald too. Yeah, nice. So you
can see... So I'll just say for that one, that's purely because I've only got one bronze Brad Hill and he's sitting in my Classic side. So definitely keen on him. Just I only got the one. So Connor McDonald will come into that side there for Contender as my pod team.
Play the cards you've got. Hey, that's why we go over the picks we have, some points of difference. We've got our plug and plays. So hopefully it gives everyone a lot of insight into some different players you could look at for a range of competitions anyway. And this is our consensus primetime team. Now, mate, I have chucked every good card again. This is what I do for primetime. I just go, whatever card I've got and they're playing and they're high rarity, I'm going to put them in. So you're going to see that there's probably a Josh Dacos missing in that back line currently. Now, I'll give you a heads up. Nick Blakey's coming out. He's not going to play this week. He's going to go to the twos because I have somebody who's going to come in and fill that position, and he's a red card. That is going to be the legend Ryan Lester. If Cal... Mate, if you could please take that legend Lester from Dill's account and chuck him into mine, that would be much appreciated because I want to roll him out in prime time. So Nick Blake is going to come out for a red Froggy Lester, which is very exciting, and some pretty standard picks everywhere else.
Yeah, love that, mate.
McInerney maybe in the forward line as well. He's been super solid in terms of a standard competition pick. You can always go him, just probably being consistent in terms of giving you that 80, 90 score low ton, been pretty consistent. So looking at our BroDown Showdown, mate, congratulations. You have taken it from 3-6 to 4-6. So I've changed that now, 4-6. It was 2-2. So again, a pretty tight contest there. And I think Sunday morning I flicked you the update and you were flat. You thought, oh, well done, mate. Another BroDown Showdown win. You'd conceded on Sunday morning. And lo and behold, Jordan Dawson comes out on Sunday and says, Anna, I got you, mate. Don't you worry. And he sailed you home to a victory.
My boy.
Yeah, and given that Archie Roberts had the highest score, you just needed Jordan Dawson to get you across that line and you were going to win. So that would have been a nice watch on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a reason why I'm super keen on him this week. I've got to repay the faith. He's done me a big solid there. So repay the faith in the skipper from the Crows and go back there once again this week because, he was definitely unreal. I didn't think he was any chance of running down Baz's 150, but, once again, he proved me wrong. Oh, wow, only 2.
Only 2. So, mate, do you want me to spin the wheel?
Look, look, they can both have it. I'll take 3. They can have 3 cards each.
All right, very nice. Sounds good. So we got Michael Cossey and Jacob125. Congratulations, guys. You're each going to get a row in this 9-player common pack. So we'll talk about which rows that'll be in a second. And we'll see what cards we can get you. That would be nice if we can get some nice cards that'll help you out for this weekend.
All right, we good?
Yep, can see it on screen, mate.
All right, let's rip it. Thanks, Michael Cossey and Jacob, for backing me in. I will give you guys 3 cards each.
You want to pick the rows, mate?
Yeah, I'll pick the row. So we'll go. Michael Cossey can have the top row.
All right, let's see what we got. Jonty Fall,
Jack Henderson, and Dodson. That's not great. Sorry, Cossey. And we'll go. Jacob can have the middle row. He's going to silver Mac Andrew.
He's been in sneaky good form.
He has silver Tom Brown and a silver Campbell Gray. And then my 3 cards there down the bottom, I've got a Platt Angus Sheldrick. Could be handy for prime time this week. A silver Lika Lear and a silver Graham from Gold Coast. So
not a great pack.
Yeah, it's a pretty grim pack if I'm being completely honest. But that's all right. Thanks to those boys for backing me in, and obviously, flick me a message to grab those cards if you want them.
Yeah, I don't mind the Mac Andrew as well. He's in my primetime team. I think that he's just been in great form, and back at TIO, he's someone I don't mind. Hey, but here we go. BroDown ShowDown for next week is going to look a little bit different. We're going to pause on the tally and the count between Haz and I. So we're going to hold the 4-6 there, and we're going to have a bit of a content creator edition. So Bales, who's going to join tonight's show, he's going to join us next week, and we're going to go up against each other this week. So Haz and I have picked 4 players to go up against Bales' 4 players there on screen. So Bales has gone for Nick Newman as his defender, and we have taken Jaden Short. He's taken Zach Butters as his midfielder. We've taken Zach Merritt. He's gone for LJ in the ruck. We've gone for Brodie Grundy. And he's taken Sam Flanders as his forward, while we have taken Toby Green. So get in the chat there. It's the same BroDown Showdown, but it's Bales versus the Fantasy Bros. And we're going to see who comes out on top in this challenge. Get your comment in now. Are you going to go for Bales, or do you reckon the Fantasy Reminding that two wins, all you need across these lines, and then it goes to the highest scoring player if it's a tie. So we've got a few comments coming in there as well. Mian, absolutely, let's go Bros for the win. Let's see how we go. And we've got Arnie Booger as well there going for Bales. He's got some good picks, so I cannot put that past you, Arnie Booger. And we know Bales is a bit of a mastermind when it comes to his footy. And in the coming weeks, we should also see the Supercoach Swordplay boys as well. Jonathan Roscoe, they'll get involved with this, and we'll throw the shout out. And as I was thinking too, we could even throw it to the community. We could almost get the community to do one as well. Go up against them and see what happens.
Yeah, don't mind that at all.
Alrighty, so let's see. Get those comments in, and as we said, we're giving away cards each every.
Bales are flying in. We've got Michael Cossey for Bales there. We've got Max Hansen for Bales there, and I've also thrown a Bales in there as well because I think he's got some great picks this week. So, not loving our chances.
Yeah, 100%, mate. He's got some great ones. But thanks, Silver Pigeon, getting your comment in there as well. I think, you want to give him a shout out?
Yeah, so congratulations to Silver Pigeon. It was confirmed today. He is in the final of the GDS Cup. So best of luck, mate. Obviously, massive supporter of us. He comes on every week, listens to some of our advice, and hopefully we've given you some picks to hopefully help you win that GDS Cup, because that would be an unreal achievement for yourself. So congratulations, mate, and thanks for backing us and supporting us as always.
Yeah, absolutely. Good luck, Silver Pigeon. Hope you take the win there, mate. And you coaches, just make sure you use that code there on screen, FBAR26. Get yourself involved in GameDay Squad. There is never a bad time to do so. And we've got our round 11 live preview next week, Wednesday, the 20th of May, with Bales. Make sure you're tuning in. It's been a pleasure, mate, previewing round 10 with you as well. I'm glad that footy was cancelled for you. I know you probably weren't too keen yourself for that, but it's been good having you on, and I know that you always enjoy it as well, getting in front of everyone and talking footy. And, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me once again, mate. And hopefully I won't be a late in next week, and you can have a good chat with Bales and get his insight and see who come out on top, whether that was him or us as the Fantasy Bros in that BroDown Showdown edition. So once again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Let's fingers crossed for a better week this week, round 10, and hopefully we can have a bit more positive things to say in our Around the Grounds next week.
Let's hope so. Good luck, everyone. See ya.